The wedding hall glittered like a palace. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, scattering light across tables dressed in ivory and gold. The air buzzed with laughter, perfume, and the clinking of glasses as guests found their seats. Everywhere I saw extravagance, lavish flower arrangements, violins playing softly in the corner, and cameras flashing like fireworks. It was my brother's big day. And I had told myself over and over that no matter what history we shared, no matter how much my family had hurt me, I would come to this wedding with an open heart. Maybe tonight, I whispered to myself as I stepped inside, they'll treat me like family again. I held on to that fragile hope as I smoothed down the dress I had saved months to afford, simple, elegant, nothing compared to the gowns around me, but mine. I clutched the small gift I'd brought in both hands, moving toward the reserved seating area near the front. That's when it happened. The bride, my brother's fiancée, soon to be his wife, spotted me. She was radiant in her lace gown, surrounded by bridesmaids and relatives. For a moment, our eyes met. Then her smile froze. Her voice cut across the hall, sharp and clear. Why is she sitting here? The music wavered. Conversations hushed. Heads turned. She pointed directly at me, her manicured finger trembling with outrage. This seat is reserved for important guests. She doesn't belong here. I froze, heat rushing to my face. Every pair of eyes seemed to bore into me. This is the front row, she continued, her voice rising. For family who matter? Not, she stopped short, but the word hung in the air anyway. Not you? A nervous laugh rippled through the crowd. Some guests looked away, embarrassed. Others smirked, enjoying the spectacle. I turned instinctively to my parents, desperate for support. My mother avoided my gaze, fiddling with her pearls. My father sipped his champagne as though he hadn't heard. And my brother, the groom, stood beside his bride, adjusting his cufflinks. He looked at me, then at her, and shrugged. She's right, he said casually. Maybe you should sit somewhere further back. Let's not cause a scene. The words sliced deeper than I expected. 'Cause a scene, I hadn't spoken a word. I had only tried to sit with them as family. But in that moment, my brother, my own blood, chose her humiliation over my dignity. A staff member hurried over, flustered. Miss, perhaps we can find you another chair? I swallowed hard. My chest ached, my throat burned, wanted to scream, to fight, to demand the respect I deserved. But no words came out, only silence. Slowly, I rose from the chair. The gift in my hands felt suddenly heavy, absurd. Guests watched, whispering behind napkins. Someone chuckled softly. My sister-in-law to be smirked, satisfied, as though banishing. Me had restored some invisible order. Thank you, she said sweetly to the usher. Please seat her where she belongs. I walked past rows of relatives, their eyes following me like spotlights. Some looked pitying, others amused. My steps echoed in the sudden hush. Every laugh I'd endured growing up, every dismissal, every insult, all of it weighed on me as I crossed that glittering hall. I was supposed to sit there with my family. But they had made it clear I didn't matter. When I reached the doors, I paused. For a moment, I considered turning back, forcing myself to swallow the insult, to sit quietly in the back like they wanted, to be invisible again. But something inside me snapped. I turned my head just enough to see the bride laughing with her bridesmaids, my brother grinning at her, sighed, my parents stiff and silent, letting it all happen. And I thought, if they don't want me here, then they'll see what happens when I leave. Without a word, I pushed open the heavy doors and walked out of the hall. Gasps followed me. Whispers flared. Someone hissed, "She's so dramatic." Another muttered, "Good riddance." But I kept walking, each step steadier than the last. The night air hit me like a baptism, cool, sharp, alive. I stood on the steps of the wedding hall, the muffled music and laughter fading behind me. My hands trembled around the gift bag, my heart pounding like a drum. For years, I had begged for a seat at their table. For years, I had let them tell me I didn't belong. Tonight, they made it official. But tonight was also the last time I would ever beg. I set the gift bag down on the marble steps. The ribbon fluttered in the breeze, and with my chin lifted, I whispered to the night. They demanded I give up my seat. They have no idea what it will cost them when I walk away. Then I turned, my footsteps echoing into the darkness, leaving their glittering world behind. People. Think a single moment breaks you the shout across a wedding hall. The pointed finger, the humiliation that makes your pulse ring in your ears. But moments don't come out of nowhere. They grow out of years. My moment had roots. So deep, you could trace them back to a childhood dining table. We had a long oak table in our house, the kind families pose around for holiday photos. My father always sat at the head, my mother at the other. My brother at my father's right, close enough to bask in the warmth of his laughter and the pride that radiated off him like heat. And me, I shifted around. Some nights I was beside my mother. Other nights a chair would accidentally be missing. And I'd pull a stool from the kitchen, balancing my plate on my knees like a guest who had dropped by uninvited. If you asked my parents, they'd say it was nothing. Don't be dramatic. My mother would murmur as she refolded the napkin my brother had flung onto the table and praised the joke he'd just told. My father would pat my brother's shoulder. You'll go far, son. And I'd learn to swallow the ache rising in my throat with water. Seats mattered in our house. Ooh, you sat beside, determined whose attention you got, whose stories you heard, whose voice you would someday try to mimic. My brother learned confidence in that right-hand position. I learned invisibility from the edges. He was the golden child in ways that went beyond cliché. When he brought home a crooked clay bowl from art class, my mother displayed it like a museum piece on the mantel. When I brought home a science medal, my father said, "That's nice," and changed the subject to my brother's upcoming soccer tryouts. On his birthdays, the house filled with balloons and a DJ who blasted music, until the neighbors complained. On mine, there was a store-bought cake and an apology. Things are tight this month. They always were, except when it came to him. He learned early how to turn rooms toward him. At 8, he was the loudest teller of funny stories. At 13, he was all elbows and swagger, soaking up the applause. At 17, he got a car and the keys to the city, or at least our neighborhood. When he backed into a fence post, my father laughed and said, "It happens," and scheduled a repair. When I asked to borrow the car for a college interview, my mother sighed as if I'd requested a diamond bracelet. I don't tell you this to ask for pity. I tell you to explain the muscle I built without knowing it. The one that learns to keep standing when no one pulls out a chair for you. Because of that muscle, I got good at quiet work. While my brother gathered crowds, I gathered skills. Learned to read people, how a twitch of the mouth meant boredom, how a tilted head invited conversation, how a careless word could shatter a person's day. I learned to handle logistics, to set up a room so lines moved and the coffee didn't run dry, to anticipate what a host would forget and fix it before anyone noticed. By high school, adults trusted me with keys. "You're reliable," the librarian said, handing me the alarm code to lock up after a weekend event. "Do you see what other people miss?" my debate coach murmured. When I quietly passed her the list of judges who had slipped out before ballots were due, my brother never noticed. Why would he? Every door he wanted opened for him. Teachers coddled him. Neighbors forgave him. Our parents wrapped him in a faith I could never seem to earn. It's hard to learn humility when the world greets you with trumpets. Then came the first time he brought home a girl who would change the weather in our house, the girl who would later become the bride, who pointed me out across a room and said, "Not here." Not her. She arrived at dinner in a dress that made my mother look suddenly shabby and a perfume that turned our kitchen into a department store. She laughed at my father's jokes like she'd rehearsed them and told my brother he was exceptional in ways he'd only ever heard from our parents. She was quick, charming, and always knew which side of the table to sit on. She glanced at me once that first night, a flick of the eyes that felt like a stamp, assessed and filed away. When my mother asked how we should set the table for dessert, the girl, she wasn't family yet, but she acted like she owned the lease, said, "Let's remove one of the side chairs so we have room for the cake cart." The side chair was mine. Later, in the hallway, as she reapplied lipstick in a compact mirror, she smiled at my reflection over her shoulder. "You don't mind, do you?" she asked lightly. "You're more flexible." It sounded like a compliment until I realized she meant bendable. That's how it started. Small displacements. A seat. A conversation. A photo where I was cut off at the edge. My brother loved that she fit right in. My parents loved that she made us look like the kind of family they wanted people to think we were. And me, I learned to breathe around. A new kind of crowding. College widened the gap. My brother majored in charisma. I majored in reality. He studied subjects that led to internships, landed at parties. I studied late and worked earlier, stringing together jobs that taught me how systems hold or break. On weekends, while he was at rooftop bars, I was under event tents helping a tired crew reorganize a layout when 6 extra tables arrived. "How did you know we'd need a second beverage station?" my supervisor asked once. I pointed at the humidity in the air, at the line of sweating guests, at the way the ice buckets already floated. "Because heat is math," I said, and she laughed until she realized I was right. There were flickers of recognition along the way. A professor who asked me to TA because I could translate chaos into bullet points. A venue manager who stuck my number on the corkboard by the office phone with a note, "Call her when things go sideways." A brand rep who pulled me aside after a conference and said, "You saved us today. What do you charge?" But at home, at family gatherings where respect was measured in who got poured the first glass of wine, I was still the extra chair. The last introduction, the apology for not being more like your brother. And the bride-to-be learned to weaponize that. At the engagement party, she planned a family photo moment. Guests were herded onto stages of risers in color-coded outfits. When it was my turn to step up, she waved an airy hand. "Oh, could someone grab another stool?" "We didn't budget for..." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. I stood on the floor beside the risers, half-cropped in the final prints, my smile floating at the edge like an afterthought. My mother later told me not to make everything about placement. But tell me, what is more about placement than a life? The first time she told me directly that I didn't belong, it was over a seating chart. We were at my parents' dining table, ironic. I know, while she adjusted cards on a board, and my mother held a glass of wine like a prop. "I've sorted VIPs, the bride said. Family on the front 2 tables, then close friends, then the others. She said others the way a person says laundry. "And where am I?" I asked, as neutrally as I could. She set a single card at the edge of the 3rd row. "Here," she said. "Back row, aisle. You can slip in if you're late." She looked at my mother, half smiling. "She's always late. I come straight from work," I said quietly. The bride leaned forward, tapping the card. "Then this is perfect." "No fuss." She paused, then added, like she was granting a royal favor, "If there's a free seat up front, you can move. Only if it doesn't look messy." Messy. That was her favorite word for anything human. I didn't argue. I had learned that arguing only tightened her smile and sharpened her tone. Instead, I went home and opened my laptop and worked on a client's budget until midnight, subtracting waste from a line item no one else had noticed. When the client emailed, "You saved us $2,300 with that one edit," I closed my eyes and remembered the feeling that number gave me versus the feeling that seating chart gave me. The numbers won, kept collecting competence, vendor contracts, delivery windows, contingency plans. I learned rebate structures and how to write purchase orders that protected you when shipments arrived warm. I solved little knots at work and stacked them in my mind like beads on a string. Click, 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 proof that I wasn't the mess she named me. But competence doesn't erase grief. Sometimes, late at night, when the apartment was too quiet, I would picture that front row and feel something inside me sag. You can tell yourself that tables are just wood and chairs just fabric and place cards, just paper. You can tell yourself that. But the child inside you, who once wanted to sit beside her father and hear him say, "Tell me about your day," that child still flinches when her name is written at the edge. As the wedding drew closer, the bride's perfection machine whirred. Louder, there were group chats with rules. Nails neutral. Hair up. No loud lipstick, please. We're keeping the palette chic. There were attendance spreadsheets and friendly reminders about call times. She assigned roles: who would welcome VIPs, who would escort grandparents, who would manage the playlist. When she got to me, she paused and turned to my mother. Maybe she can help the staff. She's good with practical things. My mother nodded too quickly. Yes, she's very helpful. Helpful is a noble thing to be. But in their mouths, helpful meant not worth seating. I said nothing. I'd learned that silence sometimes keeps your blood pressure low. Instead, I did what I always do. I watched and I prepared. I tucked a small notebook into my bag the week of the wedding and wrote down anything that might anchor me when the current ran strong call times. Names of suppliers, the emergency contact if the generator failed. Not because it was my job. It's because I needed something too. Hold. 2 things happened in the months before the wedding that would later matter in ways none of us could have predicted. First, I worked a charity gala for a foundation the groom's family supported. The caterer they'd hired was new, eager, and disastrously unprepared for a heat wave. The ice sculpture was melting into a shallow lake. The seafood station looked like a dare. Guests fanned themselves with programs. The air thick with that sticky kind of panic events get when something goes wrong and the wrong people notice. I stepped in where I could rerouted power to the backup coolers, swapped shrimp for a safer small bites menu, moved the bar to the breezier side of the garden, and cut a doorway in the tent sidewall to create draft. It wasn't heroism. It was physics and triage. But the room righted itself. People laughed again. Donations flowed. At midnight, while we wrapped cables, a man in a Navy suit stopped beside me and said, "You saved the night." I Googled him later. He was one of the groom's investors. Second, I met a woman named Tara at a vendor warehouse when I was picking up linens for an unrelated event. She managed logistics for a hotel group that sometimes partnered with the groom's company. We both reached for the same color swatch and ended up talking about lead times and how people think. 2 business days include Sundays. She had a sharp laugh and even sharper mind. People who notice systems are my people, she said, bumping my shoulder with hers. We swapped numbers for when something breaks. It felt like nothing then. It wouldn't later. The day before the wedding, the bride held a rehearsal as if it were a Broadway opening. She paced the aisle counting steps. She corrected posture like a drill sergeant with a Swarovski baton. She told my father how to hold his shoulders and my mother where to angle her chin when I arrived 5 minutes early, but in her mind already Lychee didn't look up. I stood near the side aisle until she finally flicked her eyes toward me, then toward the back. "Standing room," she said softly, "a private little knife. We're full up front." I nodded as if she'd told me the weather. That night, lying awake, I thought about all the rooms I'd entered in my life. Classrooms where no one said my name. Offices where people greeted me without looking up. Living rooms where I was a ghost at the edge of the family portrait. I thought about chairs, about how we pretend they're simple, about how every society on earth has invented rituals to decide who gets which one. I also thought about walking away, not as a tantrum, as a strategy. Sometimes the only power you have is your absence. And then morning came, the wedding day, and with it the familiar choreography, steam rising from irons, zippers hissing, hairspray fogging mirrors. I dressed slowly, choosing the dress I had bought with my own money. It wasn't a weapon. It was proof that I knew how to show up for myself. I arrived on time, found my parents near the door, and asked gently where I should sit. My mother didn't answer. My father gestured vaguely, as if the chairs were migratory birds and not a plan. The bride saw me and, well, you already know what she said. You already know how her voice rose, how the room tilted, how the word important hung in the air like a chandelier shaking in an earthquake. You know how my brother looked at me and chose the easier applause? Do you know how my feet carried me to the door as if they were done asking permission from a life that never granted it? But there's one thing you don't know yet. And it's the thing that would make everything unravel later, when I stepped out into the night air and set the small gift bag on the marble step. I wasn't empty-handed. I had a phone with numbers. An ETHA investor from the gala, Tara from the warehouse, a venue manager who owed me a favor, a chef who trusted me more than most of his clients. I had a mind crowded with lessons learned in kitchens and loading docks and dining rooms where I'd never been offered a chair. I had, in other words, the beginnings of a table of my own. As the door closed behind me, muting the music to a heartbeat, I sat on the edge of the stone railing and breathed until the shakiness left my hands. The sky was a velvet blue. Cars hummed on the avenue. I took out my notebook and wrote a single line across the top of a fresh page. If they won't let you sit, build something they have to stand for. Then I closed the notebook, lifted my chin, and wiped the last trace of tears from the corners of my eyes before they could dry into salt. Inside, they were adjusting the front row. Outside, I was adjusting my future. And though I didn't know the exact shape of it yet, I knew this: the next choice I made would not be about pleasing a room that had never clapped for me. It would be about aligning with people who recognized value, not volume. People who understood. That important is a fragile word in the mouth of someone afraid. When I finally stood and walked down the steps, I didn't look back through the glass. I didn't need to. I'd seen that picture my whole life. I took out my phone. The first text I sent was to Tara. Question about a cold chain vendor. Free to talk today. The second was to myself, in the Notes app where I keep sentences that stiffen my spine. They can move your seat. They cannot move what you've learned. I slid the phone into my bag, squared my shoulders to the evening, and started walking not away, I realized, but toward the version of me who didn't wait to be invited. Toward the moment when walking out would become the most powerful entrance I'd ever make. Inside the ballroom, the air was thick with perfume and laughter. Waiters glided between tables, balancing trays of champagne and crystal goblets. Photographers crouched like hunters, snapping every smile, every angle of the bride's shimmering gown. I slipped back in after a few minutes outside, hoping maybe things would quiet down. Maybe I could fade into a corner without more attention. But humiliation has a way of finding you, even when you're quiet. The first sting came during the photo session. All family members up front. The photographer called. Guests shuffled, chairs scraped. People rose with practiced enthusiasm. My mother grabbed my brother's arm, pulling him toward the center. The bride adjusted her veil and positioned herself under the brightest light. I hovered near the edge, waiting for someone to wave me in. No one did. Should I? I began. The bride cut me off with a sugary laugh. Oh no, sweetie, you're fine. Maybe you can help the photographer hold the extra bags, her bridesmaid snickered. The photographer hesitated, uncomfortable, but said nothing. So I stood there, my hands empty, watching flashes capture a family I belonged to by blood. But not by presence. Later, during dinner, it happened again. I found a seat near the middle row, far from the head table, and folded my napkin into my lap. The plates arrived soup first, then salad. I picked at mine, trying to ignore the bubbling chatter around me. A bridesmaid appeared at my shoulder. Hi, actually, the bride asked if you could, maybe, move? We need this spot for her cousin. I blinked, but there are empty chairs at the back. She gave a helpless shrug. Orders. Sorry. Orders, I gathered my things and slid to the back row, where I sat beside a pillar, half hidden from view. The waiter who passed by gave me a sympathetic glance. "Rough night," he murmured. I forced a smile. You could say that. By the time the toasts began, I was brittle inside. My father raised his glass and spoke of pride in his son, pride in the new daughter-in-law, pride in the family they were building. My mother dabbed at her eyes, nodding vigorously. Not once did their gaze drift toward me. Not once did my name cross their lips. It was as if I had ceased to exist. The final blow came when the bride herself took the microphone. "I just want to thank everyone," she said, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. "My wonderful in-laws, my amazing bridesmaids, and of course my handsome husband. You've all made me feel so loved." She paused, scanning the crowd. Then, deliberately, her eyes landed on me. "And thank you," she added sweetly, "to those who know their place and didn't try to make today about themselves." A ripple of laughter swept through the room. Heat rose up my neck, flooding my face. My fork trembled in my hand. Guests glanced at me, smirks tugging their lips, some openly amused, others whispering behind napkins. My chest tightened. I could barely breathe. I set the fork down, folded my napkin carefully, and stood. No one stopped me. Not my mother, who pretended not to see. Not my father, who clapped my brother on the back. Not my brother, who smirked at his bride's cruelty. I walked past rows of guests, each step ringing like a drumbeat. The laughter buzzed at my back. Someone muttered, "So dramatic." Another whispered, "Well, she never did fit in." But I didn't slow. At the doorway, I paused. I could have turned. I could have swallowed it again, forced a smile, laughed it off. I could have slipped back into my chair at the edge, invisible, but something in me hardened like steel. I thought of all the years I had been pushed aside. The birthdays forgotten, the graduations dismissed, the times my chair at the table had been accidentally missing. I thought of every moment I had begged silently for their approval, and then I thought no more. I turned my head slightly, just enough to let my words carry. "If you don't want me at your table," I said softly, "you'll regret it when I leave." Then I opened the doors and stepped into the night air. Outside, the noise dulled, replaced by the hum of traffic and the distant buzz of cicadas. The cool breeze kissed my skin, drying the heat of shame from my cheeks. For the first time that night, I could breathe. I lowered myself onto the stone steps, the marble cool under my palms. My gift bag still sat where I had left it earlier, ribbon fluttering gently. I didn't pick it up. Instead, I pulled out my notebook, the one I carried everywhere, filled with lists and notes and fragments of ideas. I opened to a blank page and wrote in firm, steady letters. "If they want me gone, then I'll make leaving the most powerful thing I've ever done." The words glowed under the lamplight. And as I sat there, breathing steady, I realized walking out wasn't weakness. It was strategy, 'cause sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is disappear. The cool night air felt cleaner than anything inside that glittering hall. I sat on the marble steps, the laughter of the wedding muffled behind heavy doors, and let my hands rest on my notebook. For once, I didn't shake. They thought they had one, that by taking my seat they'd reduced me to nothing. But humiliation, when it hits rock bottom, becomes fuel. I wasn't alone for long. A black car pulled up to the curb, and 3 men stepped out, business associates of the groom, dressed in sharp suits that gleamed under the streetlights. They weren't laughing or drinking. Their voices carried the low hum of negotiation. "Supply chain won't hold past the quarter." One said, "We'll lose investors if margins dip again." Another replied. I recognized one of them instantly. The man in the navy suit from months ago, the charity gala I'd helped save from collapse. He noticed me sitting on the steps. His brow furrowed, recognition flickering in his eyes. You, he said, pausing mid-conversation. Weren't you at the gala last spring? Stood, smoothing my dress, forcing my voice calm. Yes, I was working logistics that night. He smiled faintly. You're the reason that event didn't implode. The caterer was a disaster until you stepped in. The other men glanced at me with sudden interest. What are you doing out here? One asked. I hesitated, then let the truth slip, sharp and clean. My brother's bride demanded my seat. Apparently, I didn't belong in there. Their eyebrows rose. Ah! One gave a low whistle. Family politics, he muttered. I shrugged. It's fine. I'm used to being invisible. Tapped my notebook lightly. But invisibility has its uses. You hear things no one else hears. You see the cracks before anyone else notices. The man in the navy suit tilted his head. What kind of cracks? Ah. And just like that, the conversation shifted. I opened my notebook, flipping past blank pages to sketches of numbers, diagrams, supply schedules I'd observed in dozens of events. You mentioned supply chain, I said. If you're talking about expansion in this region, your cold storage contracts will bleed you dry in July. Vendors pad invoices when heat hits. You need bi-weekly distribution for perishables and long-term contracts for shelf stables. Adjust. Menus to align with weather patterns, and you'll cut waste by at least 12%. Their faces sharpened. They weren't just being polite. They were listening. That's exactly the bottleneck we've been hitting. One said slowly. Interesting, said another. The man in navy folded his arms. How do you know this? I met his gaze steadily. 'Cause I've lived it. I've managed events where margins mattered more than appearances. And because while my family plays at image, I pay attention to what keeps rooms standing. For a moment, silence hung between us. Then, surprisingly, the man chuckled. You're sharper than half the consultants we pay. The words settled over me like armor. Inside the hall, I could hear laughter and applause another toast. Another staged performance of love and success. But here, outside, the air was different. Real. One of the men leaned in. Tell me more. What would you change about our model if you were in charge? I didn't hesitate. For years, I had swallowed my thoughts, biting my tongue until it bled. Tonight, the dam broke. Stop chasing vanity contracts, I said firmly. You overspend on glamour deals to impress investors, but you lose stability. Build partnerships with reliable vendors, not flashy ones. Diversify your storage, and for God's sake, audit your logistics. Half your delays aren't whether they're poor scheduling. They exchanged glances, nods, a spark of respect. In their eyes, the man in navy extended his hand. If you're wasted sitting in kitchens, if you're interested, we should talk after this wedding. I think we could use your insight. I hesitated only a moment before shaking his hand. His grip was firm, assured. And in that simple gesture, everything shifted. From the corner of my eye, I noticed movement at the glass doors. My sister on Lot B had stepped out, her dress glittering under the lights, her expression sharp. As broken glass? There you are, she said, her voice dripping venom. Why are you bothering the guests? The men straightened, unimpressed by her tone. She's not bothering us, the man in navy said coolly. She's enlightening. Us, the bride blinked, thrown off. She doesn't know anything about business. On the contrary, one of the others said, she knows quite a bit. Her face reddened. She turned to me, hissing under her breath. Stop trying to steal my spotlight. I smiled faintly. I'm not stealing anything. You gave it away when you told me I didn't belong. She stormed back inside, slamming the doors behind her. The men chuckled softly. She'll get over it, one said. But you've got vision. Let's exchange contacts. Phones buzzed, numbers were shared, promises murmured. My hands barely trembled as I typed, but inside my heart thundered with something I hadn't felt in years. Power. By the time I returned to the steps alone, the notebook clutched to my chest, The wedding inside had reached its peak. Music thundered, voices rose. The first dance was beginning. I stood at the doors, watching through the glass as my family laughed, oblivious to the shift that had just occurred outside. They thought they had erased me. But erasure has a funny way of backfiring. Because sometimes being pushed out of the room puts you in exactly the right place to rewrite the script. I whispered to myself, steady and certain. They demanded I leave my seat, so I built one of my own. The ballroom thundered with applause as my brother and his bride spun across the dance floor. Her gown shimmered, his smile gleamed, and the guests clapped like an audience watching a fairy tale. But fairy tales are only as strong as the truths they hide. And tonight, truth was already seeping in through the cracks, 'cause outside, I hadn't. Just shaken hands with powerful men. I'd shifted the balance of the evening. I slipped quietly back into the hall. Nobody noticed me at first. The music was too loud, the spotlight fixed too tightly on the glittering couple. But whispers have a way of spreading faster than light. The investors followed soon after, their presence magnetic. Tipo straightened. In their chairs, heads turned, conversations faltered. The bride, catching sight of them, brightened instantly. She detached from my brother's arm and glided over. "Gentlemen, you made it back just in time for dessert. Please, join us up front." But they didn't move toward her. Instead, the man in the navy suit lifted his glass and cleared his throat. "Before dessert," he said, voice carrying above the chatter, "I'd like to say something." The room hushed. "I've attended many weddings," he began, "but tonight reminded me of an important truth. Respect isn't about chandeliers or champagne. It's about recognizing the right people, even when others overlook them." He turned deliberately toward me. Murmurs spread through the hall like ripples in water. "This young woman," he continued, gesturing in my direction, "spoke more sense in 10 minutes than most consultants do in a year. Her insight may have saved us from a costly mistake." Gasps. Forks clattered onto plates. Guests craned their necks to see Mimi sitting at the back, half hidden by a pillar. The bride's face drained of color. My brother shifted uncomfortably. Tugging at his tie, my parents stiffened, frozen statues. The man's voice didn't waver. "From today forward, I'll be seeking her counsel directly. If her family won't recognize her value, others will." The declaration hit like thunder. Applause erupted, not from everyone, but enough. Guests nodded, whispered, looked at me with new respect. Some clapped awkwardly, not knowing why, only knowing they should. The bride recovered first, her smile stretched thin. "That's very kind, but she isn't part of this evening." She is part of this," the man interrupted sharply. "In fact, she's the only part of this evening that impressed me." The silence that followed was sharper than any scream. I rose slowly, the back of my chair scraping softly against the marble floor. My legs trembled, but my voice was steady. "All my life," I began, "I've been told where to sit or where not to. At this very wedding, I was told I wasn't important enough to sit with my own family. I was told to move, to hide, to disappear." Eyes locked on me. My mother's lips pressed thin. My father's jaw tightened. My brother stared at the floor. The bride glared, her hands clenched in her skirts. "But here's the thing," I said, letting my words hang. "Seats don't give you worth. They only reveal who's afraid of losing theirs. Tonight, you tried to erase me. But in doing so, you handed me something far greater clarity. Opportunity." The bride hissed. "You're ruining everything." I turned toward her.com. "No, you ruined it yourself when you chose cruelty over kindness. When you demanded I give up my seat, you thought you won. But you didn't just lose me, you lost respect. And tonight, respect is worth more than all the flowers in this room." The guests gasped again, whispers buzzing like electricity. My brother finally spoke, his voice strained. This is supposed to be my wedding. Why are you making it about you? I looked at him, sadness in my chest but steel in my tone. It was never about me. It was about the fact that you let her decide I wasn't family. And you agreed. For a moment, silence. Heavy, uncomfortable. Then one of the investors raised his glass again. To the clever sister, he said firmly. Others followed, hesitant. At first, then stronger. Glasses lifted, scattered chorus. To the clever sister, the sound washed over me, bittersweet. Years of invisibility crumbling in a single toast. The bride snapped, her voice cracked with fury. Enough. This is my night. She doesn't belong. Here she never has. Her outburst rang ugly against the chandeliers, souring the air. Guests exchanged uneasy glances. Some whispered behind hands. Is this the real her? My brother tried to calm her, but his words faltered. My parents sat rigid, trapped in silence, and me. I felt lighter than I had in years, 'cause their masks had slipped, and the room finally saw them for who they were. I stepped toward the center, my heels clicking softly. The crowd parted just slightly, eyes following me. At the foot of the head table, I stopped. You demanded I give up my seat, I said, my voice clear, so I did. And in leaving, I found a place of my own. I don't need this table anymore, because when I walk out tonight, I'll leave with something far greater than any of you, planned respect, dignity, and opportunities you'll never touch. The bride's mouth opened, but no words came out. My brother looked at me, guilt flickering behind his eyes, but I didn't wait for him to speak. I turned head high and walked toward the doors. As I reached them, I paused. The investors nodded at me respectfully. A few guests clapped again. My parents remained frozen as if carved from stone. I whispered one final line, more to myself. Then to them, but loud enough to be heard. You left me at the edge, so I left you at the altar. Then I pushed the doors open and stepped into the night for the last time. Outside, the air was cool, alive. The stars glittered above, unbothered by the chaos unraveling behind the walls. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through new contacts added that very night. Names that held more weight than my family ever gave. Me. Numbers that meant doors opening, not shutting. I smiled faintly, sliding the phone back into my bag. Because tonight, they thought they had broken me. But really, they had freed me. My brother's bride demanded my seat and my family. Agreed. They thought they'd humiliate me into silence. Instead, I walked away with dignity, with respect, and with the power they'll never earn back. They left me out, but I left them at the altar. If this story shocked you, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read them all. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to Toxic Bloodlines for more stories of betrayal, family secrets, and the sweetest revenge. Until next time, stay strong.